At this time, I ask that we would observe a moment of silence to commemorate the life of Stuart Scott. Please join me. Thank you. I was thinking of him the other day on Sunday when the announcement hit the press that he had passed away. And I thought about, for nearly 20 years, I could see huddles of young men and women looking at television sets and watching this man boldly breathe life into the game of sports. And I wondered, as those young people went to bed at night, how many of them, while having dreams of becoming Megatron and LeBron, could see themselves on the set of ESPN. And so in thinking about his life and what he represented, I think it's important for us to note that he provided a template for young people, but really for all of us, to see ourselves in the world of sports beyond the white lines and the paint. I want to formally welcome all of you for traveling to Austin, Texas, and I can assure you that you won't experience an earthquake while you're here, unless, of course, we get another big-time football commitment. And I also have to commend the leadership of President Powers in creating the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation. The center's primary objective is to support high school coaches, the men and women who are on the front lines of character reform across the country, and to provide them with the tools to make positive interventions in the lives of our young people. Earlier in the day, I heard many researchers and experts talk about this educational pipeline. And as many of you know, when a negative story hits the press, everyone bemoans the fact that an NFL player went awry. But we have to start pushing these interventions farther down the pipeline. Because as a former NFL coach, I can tell you this. When we drafted a player and he would arrive in Detroit or Kansas City, and it doesn't matter which city he would land in, when he would arrive on that team, so many of his values were already entrenched. And there wasn't much room for growth. And so the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation will help to equip those men and women who are spending countless hours. We're talking about the men and women who aren't just coaching players in games. We're talking about the football coach who has two young men living in his home because dad's not around. Or the basketball coach who feeds the players on Sunday because mom is working 3 jobs. We're talking about those people. And so our primary objective is to support them. And then secondly, this. In conjunction with UT Athletics, we're crafting a financial literacy program that will also include the tenets of sound decision making. And this course will be a signature course in the undergraduate studies department and will be offered starting in the fall of 2015. And later this year, we'll be fortunate to announce a partnership with a Fortune 500 company, which will allow us to spare no expense in being disruptive and innovative in crafting the curricula to help our young men and women here at the University of Texas. 8 years ago, I eloped from law school. So a buddy of mine called me up and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I just finished a clerkship at a law firm." And he said, "Why don't you come with me to South Carolina?" I said, "Well, why does anybody want to go to South Carolina?" He said, "Well, I'm working the Steve Spurrier football camp. I just need somebody to come along." So I jumped in the car. And I got there, and I'm sitting in the back of the room, and a coach didn't show up. So Coach Spurrier says, "Hey, can anybody in here coach DBs?" Now, I'll take you back. Mount Pleasant High School, I was a 5'10", 165 strong safety. Okay. I didn't have Division I offers rolling in my mailbox. But I figured, hey, I'm from Texas. I know football, so I can do this. I said, yeah, sure, of course. So I jumped in there. And I had the best 72 hours of my life. coaching sixth graders, backpedaling 45-degree angles and 90-degree angles and man turning and zone vision. And I left Columbia and I said to myself, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to do, because here's what I noticed. I was a resident dorm tutor during that time, and I watched as these kids, the kid from Westlake and West Memphis and South Dallas, and the South Side of Chicago, and I watched as these young people, these black and these brown, these white faces, became friends over this sport we call football. And where previously I thought that my place in life was to become a public official, it challenged me to rethink the way that I view myself in terms of public service. And so I wrote letters to every team in the league, and Coach Belichick sent me a nice thanks but no thanks, and so did Coach Dungy. And Herm Edwards gave me a shot. He gave me a training camp internship, and he said, listen, here are the terms. No pay, no benefits, 18-hour days. I said, it sounds like a good deal, man. I'm on. So I graduated from law school June 10th, 2007. I jumped in an old Tahoe, drove to Kansas City, and that began a 7-year career in coaching. And in thinking about this conference and how we're going to grapple with how do we make the positive interventions that can change these young men and women that we deal with on a daily basis. I don't care if you're a professor or an athletic director. I don't care if you're an academic advisor or a parent. The young men and women that I'm talking about look to you, and they look through you to craft a picture of who they want to be. And so I have 3 takeaways from my time in sports that I want to talk about tonight. First, we must force our young people to answer one question, and that is, who are you without the ball? Who are you without the ball? I was recruiting one of the top kids in the country, according to Rivals, which obviously, they know it all. 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars. As a side note, the last Pro Bowl, the average star rating of the players in the Pro Bowl was 2.5. Okay, so somebody's getting it wrong. But anyway, I was sitting in the home of this 5-star recruit in Baltimore, and we're sitting there, and I turned to him and I said, so tell me, who are you without the ball? And he looks at me, wide receiver, and he said, hey, coach, if I ain't got the ball, I'm blocking. I said, no, man, that's not what I'm talking about. So let me slow down. Let me just slow this down a little bit. I said, who are you outside the game of football? Who are you outside the game of football? And for the next 10 minutes, he stared at me and we sat in silence. And I realized this was the first time someone had forced him to think about himself outside the confines of a helmet and a set of shoulder pads and the latest Nikes. This was the first time someone had forced him to think about his role in society beyond the gridiron. And stripped of 40-yard dash times and Rivals rankings and vertical jumps and shuttle numbers, he was left with nothing. And he finally said to me, he said, you know what, coach? This is all I got. Kid's 17 years old. 17 years old, 6'2", 218 pounds, a life before him, and he has determined at the age of 17 that this sport is all that he has. I thought about Socrates and Paul, and these are 2 philosophers and an apostle who were separated by 350 years, but they both came to the same conclusion, that the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined life is not worth living. And so our first role as administrators and as coaches and as supporters and boosters and fans, our first role is to force our young people those young black males and black females to think about their role and vision for life outside of the confines of sports. Because in reality, I think about the philosopher Herm Edwards. He told me the first day that I started working in Kansas City, he said, the ball goes flat for us all one day. This ball that we chase around and we throw and we spend countless hours scheming over, this ball will go flat for us all one day. So whether you're an academic advisor, at some point there's going to be someone who's younger, who's going to come in and take your job. If you're a professor, someone's going to come in who's going to be a more prolific publisher and a better politician will become the head of the department. And if you're a coach, and I can attest to this, at some point you'll be fired for the last time. You'll be fired for the last time. So the ball will go flat for us all. And so this examination of who we are outside the framework of sports is important. And I think about the research. Dr. George Barzokas at UCLA, he's passed on. He did some groundbreaking research in looking at the brain. And he studied the substance myelin, which is it coats the passageways in the regions of the brain. And in his research, he found this. He found that over time, myelin starts to fray around the neurons that control cognitive ability 10 years later than around the regions that control movement. So in short, you will slow down on the football field before your mind slows down. And here's what we've done. Our players have turned into double down blackjack players instead of hedge fund managers. My dad's an old Baptist preacher. I come from a home where I have a Baptist preacher and I have an elementary school principal, 2 parents in my home. So as you can tell, there wasn't much room for movement in my house. I came home, we went to choir practice. When I was in kindergarten, my mom taught me the first grade curriculum. When I was in first grade, she taught me the second grade curriculum. But I'm smart enough to understand that's not the norm. I was blessed. But my dad said, listen, he said, don't think of yourself as a CEO. Think of yourself as a hedge fund manager. So in your portfolio, you're going to have the risky bets. You're going to have those mid-cap companies. And so when someone fires you, you need to have a skill set that regardless of which way the market moves, you're in a sound position. And our student athletes don't view themselves this way. They see themselves as the double down, all in on the game. And if you ask those football players at UAB how that bet turned out, it's not always a smart move. Secondly, we have to expand this notion of a business trip past game day. Business trip past game day. There's a constant refrain from coaches and players. You heard it, and I have, and I apologetically say that I've used it. This is a business trip. This is a business trip. I've said it. I was in West Virginia, DB's coach. Hey, guys, it's a business trip. We're going to Texas, going to Oklahoma. This is a business trip. Get ready. And I think about this, and you'll see players descend the steps of a bus, and they'll have a nice jacket on and a starched shirt and nice slacks, and you'll say to yourself, you know what, those guys are ready to go play. But on Monday, when they're walking to that econ class, they're back in the Nike hoodie and the sweats. And for some reason, this idea of a business trip applies to the sports context, but not the classroom. So I can get dressed up to play the big rivalry game, but when I go to econ and when I go to management and when I go to Spanish, you know, the Nike hoodie and the sweats will work. So we have to There's a subconscious value proposition that we're placing on sports. While we'll say, hey, listen, only 0.2% of the population goes and plays sports. Here's what we have to realize. The reason why that young man and that young woman is in your meeting room is because they've never believed the odds. Right? They've never believed the odds. They're a Division I athlete because they believed when they were in the 6th grade they could do it. So when you tell them, hey, there is a small chance that you will make it to the NFL, they say, okay, I'm the small chance. I'm the outlier. I'm the exception to the rule. But we have to expand this notion and say, okay, now listen, we know you're here to play sports. But why should you walk away from this position with the viewpoint that Ricky Williams expressed here last fall? And he said, I left the University of Texas and I was only qualified to play football. That's the only thing I was prepared to do. Now, this is what I'm going to say. I believe in personal responsibility. And I would tell my recruits this. I said, listen, if you come to West Virginia University and don't leave with a master's on our dime, that's your fault. We need to pay for your undergraduate, your bachelor's, and your master's. So if you leave without your master's, that's your fault. So don't bemoan the fact that the multi-billion-dollar packages surrounding the college football playoff series. You have to walk on campus and find ways to extract value from the system because you understand at some point this skill that you have will go away. And finally, I want to come to this call. If not you, then who? If not you, then who? Whether athletic director or academic advisor or professor or coach, we have to pledge to be the cold waters of reality that these young men and women face. They need a dose of reality that comes from us. And here's the challenge. The challenge is we need them to play on Saturday. Well, I was a coach. I was assistant coach at West Virginia. What did I think about? My players, and then I wanted to become a defensive coordinator. And then I wanted to become a head coach. And I understood when I walked onto that campus that more than likely I would be there for 2 or 3 years. They get it as well. They know that coaches, the coach that they begin with as a freshman probably won't be there when they graduate, if they graduate. They understand that. And Herm said something to me. He said, players have a PhD in coaching. Because since their Pop Warner days, they've heard every speech. They've heard every promise. They can read the body language. They know when you're fake. They know when you don't mean it. They know what they can get away with. And if you don't hold them to a strong line of responsibility, you'll never have them. And I'll take you to this conversation. When Commissioner Goodell came into Austin, I was fortunate to sit in that meeting between the commissioner and Coach Strong. And I heard Coach Strong said this. He said, I understood when I first came here that if I didn't set my beliefs in place early, I would never have the locker room. From day one. From day one. Because if it's day 10, if it happens on day 10, or if it happens when your star quarterback gets into trouble and now you want to get right, they see that. It needs to happen on day 1. The standard has to be set on day 1. I'll tell you a story. 4th and 1 is a camp. The first year that we ran the camp, a young mother and her son came up to me and she said, we need help with paying for this kid's college applications. I said, okay. And I said, so I looked down and I noticed the kid, it was 2010. He had the latest pair of Jordans on. I could tell they were fresh out of the box. Fresh out of the box. I told her mom, I said, sell the Jordans. She said, what? I said, sell them. Go on eBay and sell them. You can easily get 160 for them. Sell them. She said, but he needs them to go to school. I said, so hold on now. I said, I'm kind of old, but there's a requirement that he wear Jordans at his high school? No. That's not what I'm saying, Coach. But, all the other kids have them. I said, listen, those pair of Jordans are costing you 3 college applications. 3 college applications. He's wearing 3 college applications. And here's what I'm going to tell you. If you sell the Jordans, we'll match you dollar for dollar. And so now he'll apply to 6 schools. She said, I can't do it, and walked away. This is the mother. This is the mother. Now, here's what I want to say. If you get a chance to stroll around campus, you'll go by the tower and you'll see something, and you'll see the inscription. And it says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And oftentimes we misquote that and we say set free. But the original Greek, it's make free, and it's talking about a mindset and not a condition. It's talking about the shifting of a mindset, because conditions change with the weather, and they change with what Twitter says. They change with how many retweets you get, how many likes your post get. That's what a condition does. But when you have a mindset, that mindset will enable you to weather the changes in society and the market forces. What we have to do is this. We have to become the truth sayers. We have to become the truth sayers. When the young man comes in, and I'm going to say this, I'm fearful. And I say we, and I'm talking about a collective body, all of us in sports, in college athletics. I'm fearful what we are placing on the altar of APR. What are the sacrifices we're putting on the altar of APR? Because if a kid tells you that he wants to be an engineer, and you try to push him into cultural studies, now I don't have anything against cultural studies. If a kid wants to be an engineer and you want to push him into cultural studies, you're doing the kid a disservice. But you're not just doing the kid a disservice. Here's what I think about. I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. My 4-year-old son, Dylan, wants to go to the University of Texas because Daddy went to the University of Texas. He couldn't point to Austin on a map for you right now. He wants to go to Harvard Law School because Daddy went to Harvard Law School, and the guy that he sees on CNN, Obama, went there too, so that's where he's going to go. So when we suffocate the aspirations of our young people, what we're really doing is we're suffocating the generational dreams that come after them. I'm the great-great-grandson of a man who left slavery in Mississippi, walked west to Panola County, worked for 5 years to buy 40 acres, set up a church, set up a home, put aside money at that time when his kids couldn't go to school. He set up an educational fund. Talking about this hope in the unseen. He set up an educational fund. He said, listen, at some point, these young people that I have, my progeny, will be able to go to school. There's only $50 in here, but whatever you can do with it, I want you to give it to them. So when I grew up and my dad and my mom were both college graduates, the bar had been set. But now the market's changing. Your bachelor's, the bachelor's is the old high school degree. The master's, I tell kids now listen, the master's now has to become the minimum standard. That has to become the minimum. And on standards, the average grade that a player needs to become eligible to play in high school across the country is a 75. A 75. And I heard some research today. A young man said that, he was talking to a young man, and Brother Martin talked about this. He said, the high school player said, you know what, my coach, if I make high grades, I don't hear from him. If I make all A's, I don't hear from him. But if I get close to that ineligibility cutoff, now all of a sudden I start hearing from him. We have to find a way to start praising this academic achievement that our young people are experiencing. That has to be right at the forefront with the first team All-Americans. That has to be at the forefront of the conference championships. The academic achievements that these young people are producing on campus, and it's happening because outside of the university context, people don't believe that these young men and women are learning anything. They don't. They don't. And we're not doing a good enough job of broadcasting that to the world. To the walk-on who's a electrical engineering major, right? He doesn't play on Saturday, but he's going to graduate with an electrical engineering degree. That has to be praised as much as when that running back breaks the all-time record. They have to be equally praised. I'm going to leave you with this. I watch this speech at least once a year, and I go back to Mac Brown's speech to the team after he had won the biggest game of his career. So after the Rose Bowl, he's in the locker room, and he's addressing a group of young men who had just reached the pinnacle of sports success. And he said this. He said, I don't want this to be the best thing that ever happened to you. I don't want this moment, this moment of beating USC when people said that you couldn't do it. I don't want this moment of standing around the confetti and holding up this trophy. I don't want this moment to be the best thing that happened to you. And what we have to do as influencers is find a way to build up the young men and women who spend time and 40 hours and 50 hours. I know what the rules say, but you all know it if you've been involved. I've been in the meeting room. I wouldn't want to keep a pin to how many hours I kept my DBs in there. These young men and women who are spending 40 and 50 and 60 hours a day playing a sport at whatever university it may be cannot be the pinnacle of their success. We have to transform sports, which I love dearly because it teaches so many life-changing lessons. We have to transform sports from a pinnacle to a pit stop. This is a setting for you to gain the best leadership training you can get, but you have to take these skills, these management skills, and these skills of human intelligence, and then transfer those skills outside the domain of sports. This is a pit stop. It's not the pinnacle. It's not the peak. It's not the summit. This is where you're going to refuel and move on for success. That is the challenge that we have. I pray that as all of you return to your respective homes, that you continue to push our young people and that you force them to grapple with the questions that they have to answer. Who are they without the ball? Who are they without that baton? Who are they when the gym lights go off? Force them to grapple with those difficult questions and continue to transform lives for the benefit of society. Thank you.